Hello and welcome back to our online multiplayer tutorial series, where we're covering many aspects of online multiplayer and how to get things replicated and working together. In this episode, it's going to be a two-parter. The first part, we're going to be talking about how to get widgets working on the screen and connecting to our local player. And then later in the next part, we'll be talking about how to get widgets working for remote players so you can see their stats and scores in the game. So to get started off, we need to start off with our local player. So for that, let's first of all design our HUD and widget. So I'm going to go into my UI folder and I'm going to go and add a new user interface widget blueprint. And this can be the heads-up display. And this will be like the general display that's used for many of our things. Alongside that, we'll also need to add another one, and that'll be the player unit frame. So player unit frame. And we're going to go in and design this player unit frame. Okay, so in here we're going to put in our we'll put in a vertical box, and the vertical box I want to spread out across the whole entire canvas. So I'm going to change its anchor to be full screen, and change the offsets to be 0, 0, 0, 0, so it fills the whole entire screen. Then inside that I'm going to put in some text, which will be the player's name. Then we'll have in a horizontal box twice. One is going to be used for their health bar, and the other one's going to be used for their score bar. So I want the health bar and score bar to take up equal spacing. So I'm going to click on the first horizontal box, go to the right hand side and change the size here to fill, and leave it like that. I'm then going to go to horizontal box, the second one, choose fill again, and there you go, they will now take up the remaining space split evenly. The little number next to the fill refers to the ratio that it will take over. So if they're both set to 1, they'll take up the space evenly. So in here, I'm going to put in two things. So I'll put in a text field into my horizontal box, as well as a progress bar into the top one. And then I'm going to click on the progress bar itself and tell that to fill. But I only want this one to take up 0.8 of the screen. So go 0.8 for that. And then for the text block, I'm going to change that to fill and put in 0.2. So it takes up 20% of the space. And then going to take it to horizontally align in the center of the available space by changing horizontal and vertical alignment to center. Then I'm going to go to the next horizontal box and basically do something very similar. But instead of a progress bar, we'll have just two text fields. They'll both be fill and set to appropriate values, so 0.2 for this first one, and the second one fill to 0.8. And I'm going to center align the first text field and just change the horizontal alignment for the next one. Okay, so other things we're going to do just stylistically, I'm going to change the player name font to be a bit bigger, so I'm going to change it to 34 instead. And then I'm going to wrap the whole entire thing inside of a border. So to do that, I'm going to go to my vertical box, the thing we started off with, right click on that and wrap with a border. And I'm going to make it nice and black. So brush color, change it to black. And there we go. So whenever you design a widget, you need to enable the things that are going to be changeable during the game as a variable. So this first one here, the text block up top here, it's going to be the player name, so I'm going to do player name underscore text, and tick is variable. I'm going to go on to the next text block. This one isn't variable, so I'm just going to change the text that's in here saying health. The progress bar though is variable, and I'm just going to change the name of it to health bar. You'll see it's already ticked as variable. Next text block is going to be saying just score, and it won't have a variable associated to it, but the next one will, and that would be the score underscore text, and that's what we'll name it, and tick is variable. And that's it, that's all we're going to do on here for now. Let's just get displaying on the screen first. So next we need to put that into a heads-up display. So go into your heads-up display. In our heads-up display, you're going to scroll down the palette until you find the user-created section and find your player unit frame. Drag this out, and we're going to anchor it to the top left here. So I'm going to change the anchor to top left, and change the position X to 40 and position Y to 40 as well. And then I'll change the size of it by just dragging out what I want it to be. So about there will do. Hit compile and save. And that'll do for now on here. We'll come back to that later on. Close this. And now we have to get this displaying on the screen. So for an online multiplayer game, you can't just add it to, say, the pawn, because every instance of the game is spawning these pawns in, so you can't have the pawn just add these HUDs in. So the best place to put it is on the player controller. So let's find our player controller. And there we are. And we're going to do a begin play here. And on the begin play, the very first thing we need to do is determine whether or not this controller is owned by the client. Now, each client will have only one controller, but the server will actually keep track of each of these different controllers. So the server, if we did it without this check that we're about to do, will try and add a new widget for multiple times, which will give you a load of errors. So what we're going to do here is just right click and get is local player controller. This will return a boolean saying true or false whether or not this player controller is the one being played with by the client. So it's only going to add it once on your own local client PC. So on the true here, we're going to create widget, and we'll choose the class of a Headsup Display. I'm going to promote it to a variable because it's just useful to have that. So Headsup Display, and then I'm going to tell it to add to viewport. And there we are. And that's on the player controller. So once you've done that, hit save and let's play test that game out. And we should see now each client has their own health bar and score bar all ready to go. It has no values in it, but it's all there. So how do we tie the different values into it? Now this is where it gets a bit more trickier because obviously the server keeps track of all the player controllers, so we can't really just rely on just a player controller to do this. So what we're going to do instead is go onto the HUD itself actually. So let's go onto the HUD and Headsup Display and go to its graph settings. So we're working with just the construct here, and we're going to start things off by getting the player controller. And as we just done, we want to make sure that this controller is the one that's owned by the client. So going to type in is local player controller, and these will go into a branch. If that is true, we're going to take our player unit frame here, get, and from there we're going to set its various values. Now what's easier to do here is to send over the controlled pawn over to our player unit frame. So I'm going to go into my player unit frame here, go to the graph, and I'm going to store two things. I'm going to go to my new variable here. I'm going to store the player controller that this thing belongs to, and as well as that I want to store the player pawn. So the type for these are, for the pawn is going to be pawn, and for the controller it's going to be player controller. Hit compile. Now we want to make these editable, so click on the editable eye to make them editable, and we're going to just click compile and save that. Now go back to Headsup Display, and then from the player unit frame reference we can drag out and do set player, and we're going to do controller. Plug that in, and the controller will be this one that we just checked for. So we can drag that up like so. There's a few ways to do this, by the way. This is just one way. Next, we're going to take out from our player unit frame and set player pawn, and plug that in there. Now the player pawn is going to come from the controller. So what I'm going to do is take from here and get controlled pawn. Which one you want? Controlled pawn. There we go. And plug that in. Hit compile and save. So once that's done that, we want to then tell our player unit frame on their construct to handle what to do with the code. So on the event construct on the player unit frame, we are going to not go straight away into the code. We need to delay it a little bit. We have to give it time just to load up the whole map. So on the event construct here, just put a little delay in, and 0.2 should be fine. So next we're going to take out the player controller, choose get, and we're going to check if it's valid. So right click on it and convert to validated get. If it is valid and player controller is an actual thing we have, we want to check that it is actually the right one, and not check that it's the right one, but also convert it to the correct type. So take the player controller here and cast to the custom player controller, and then we're going to do the exact same thing for the player pawn. Get player pawn, right click, convert to validated, plug that in, and then player pawn here we're going to cast to the third person character in my case. Now for each of these we want to save their output. So as player controller here, we're going to promote that to a variable, and we'll leave that as is. That'll be fine. As player controller, custom player controller, I'm fine with that. And do it again here, promote to variable, like so. So that's going to get us that. Next we need to be able to set up our various information things we have on our board here. So the very first thing we'll do is we want to get the player's name or player ID. So I'm going to make a new event in here, and we'll call it get player name, and the player name is going to be, actually let's change it to set player name because that's a bit more accurate to what we're doing. Oh no, we'll say get. So get player name, we want to drag the player controller out, your custom player controller, and then from there we're going to get player state. From the player state we can get our particular player state we want from casting to it. So take out from there and cast to custom player state. And once again we want to store that as a variable. So come out there, promote to variable, and we'll leave it as custom player state. So when we get in the player name, we're going to get the custom player state here, and we can just get the player ID number if we want, and this is the ID number that's associated to the game straight away. So for now we'll leave it like that, but this could be anything that you put on the player state, whatever you like really. So we've got that, and I'm going to set that to our player name text here. So I'm going to drag that out, choose get, and then set text, and it's this bottom one here. Plug that in, and then plug that in there. So now it should have our player name, or be able to get our player name from our player state. We just need to call this function. So at the end here, I'm just going to call get player name. So let's see if that works. If we go and test that out, we should now have the different blocks here all have different numbers. So we've got 272, 273, and 271, which is brilliant because that means that they are all unique, referring to unique player states and information, which is great. Okay, so now we've got the player name sorted out, we need to get other information. So for that, we're going to make another custom event called update. Now this is going to be changing stuff regularly, whereas this one we'll only do this once because you're not changing the player name all the time, so that'll be staying the same. But update here will be called every time we change the health or get a new score, whatever it may be. So on update, we're going to take this and we need to get those various values. So first thing, let's do health bar. So I'm going to drag out health bar, and I'm going to set %. Now for this I need an actual value on our player character. So let's go to our player character and a health value to our pawn. Now something like health I'd put onto the pawn itself because the player pawn is what's keeping track of their own health there rather than anything else. So let's add health variable to this and make that a float. Compile and set its default value to 1, which is full health. And what we're going to do here is just drag out add third person character and then get health. And that will get their current health value, whatever it is. Next, we're going to change their score. So you can drag score out, score text, set text, and the score is actually being stored somewhere else. Now, if you remember rightly, when we done our last episode in the player controller, our score here was being stored on our player state. So let's get that from our player state. So drag as custom player state, get player score, and it makes more sense to have the player score associated to the player state, because when the player dies in game, you don't want to lose all their points. They'll just respawn and keep collecting points. Obviously, it depends on the game design you're doing, but by and large, that's what it should be doing. And that's our update function sorted out. So when does this get called? As I said, it's when anything happens to the player character. So on here, we need to do a bind event. So I'm going to go to my player character here, and on event dispatcher, click on new event dispatcher, and call update HUD. We'll call it. And hit compile. Then I'm going to go onto my player unit frame, drag out my as third person character, and then bind event to update HUD. Plug that in at the end of begin play, then the event will go into update custom event. So whenever we call the update HUD event dispatcher, it'll call this thing on the HUD, on the player frame. But we also want to set this at the start of the game too. So after that, we're going to just say update there, and that'll call this function straight away. Okay, hit compile. So at the moment, we've got two things to update regularly, and that is when we score points and when we take damage. So let's go into our taking points. So find up our pick up points item here, and at the end, when we destroy the actor, we're going to take the as third person character here. Let's just get rid of that thing. So get as third person character, drag this out, and we're going to tell it to call update HUD. Call update HUD. And there you go. You may want to add like a reroute or something in here to make this not as messy. Like so. Hit compile and save, and that's that. So let's see how that works. Hit play. Now we've got the HUDs all showing their score, their health, and their player ID. And as we pick up these points, the player score updates on the character that I'm playing as at the moment, but not the others, which is correct. That's what we want. Okay. So next we need to do it when we actually take damage as well. So let's go into our player character, third person character, and find where we take damage. So here I've got event point damage, and at the moment we're just doing a line trace out to see which direction it's coming from. What I want to do here is actually apply damage to our health. So I'm just going to take our health value and get that health value and just minus just a bulk standard point out of it. So let's do minus there and then set health there. And the value coming out of this was a random value, wasn't it? What was it? Shoot. Fire bullet. It was a random value between 10 and 20. Okay. So let's normalize that value. So let's take this and take the damage out. I'm just going to reroute that. And we're going to normalize this float, normalize to range. And the range we're going to normalize to is between 0 and, let's say, 100. Okay? And plug that in. And what this will do, it will just say, whatever this value is between, in this case, 10 and 20, whatever value this is, wherever it sits between 0 and 100, make it a percentage. So if it scores 20, it'll output 0.2, which is what we want here. So the next issue is when we call update HUD, we can't just tack it onto the end here. Because this function is only running on the server, this will only update the server's HUD. Okay, so that's no good. Instead, what we need to do is create another custom event in here to handle the updation of the HUD here. So I'm going to create a new custom event, and we'll call this one call update. And we're going to drag in our call update event dispatcher and plug that in. choose on the call update the replication method to be multicast. Therefore, it sends this message out to all the clients and say, hey everyone, update your HUD. Stuff has changed on your health value because it's been replicated. And they will all then follow suit and update their HUDs. So all that's left is to call this function over here. So call update. Hit compile, and let's see that now in action. So if I shoot one of my NPCs here, or my other players here, you can see their health bar in the corner there is changing. And likewise, if we go into this other one here, if they shoot this guy, his health bar is changing. Shoot the server, their health bar is changing. And they can also pick up points, and their thing will reflect that. And there you have it. So the next part, we're going to go through and add little health bars above their heads. So when you shoot them, you can see their health value changing on your screen. So join us in the next part where we go over that. You can watch that part right now over on patreon.com/RyanAiley. So massive thank you to all of our patrons for showing their support, as it really is amazing, and I can't thank you enough. So thank you again so much. And if for some reason you're watching this and you're yet to have subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. There's new content every day or every week. So check it out and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye everyone.